Hi, that's Caitlin with CabaYoga. Welcome to today's episode of Back to Earth. This is our collection of interviews to expand your mind and rise your consciousness during this time of this global pandemic and our quarantine. And today we are with the lovely Celenia Delsol, who is joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area, and she is a grief recovery specialist. Welcome, Celenia.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Yeah, me too. I love this, getting these totally different perspectives on everything, walks of life, seeing what everyone's up to and what's going on in that mental universe and all the intelligence that you have to share. So I'm super excited to talk to you. Let's start by having you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, your journey.
Sure. So I am a grief recovery specialist. I was trained as a psychotherapist. I have a master's in counseling psychology, and I was in the process of earning my license to practice as a psychotherapist when my son, Julian, who was 20 years old at the time, died by suicide. And it's been 10 years since that happened. And as a result of that loss, and my process through that loss, I accumulated a number of tools and resources for myself, for my own healing. And I then started to share them with others with very positive results. And so I abandoned the psychotherapist track, if you will, and I just focused on grief recovery. And so that's what I do now.
Cool. And you have a podcast and a blog, right?
I do. I have a podcast called Beauty in the Breakdown, Living and Loving Life After Loss. I put up a new episode every week. You can access it on Apple Podcast and Spotify and a number of other platforms. I've been doing that for maybe 3 months, 4 months.
Okay.
I've lost track of time.
Okay.
And then the blog, I've been writing fairly regularly on the blog for about 6 years. Although I will say that immediately after the death of my son, writing was my go-to method for processing what had happened. And I waited a few years before I kind of made my writings public on a blog. And I got feedback from people just saying, thank you for telling your story. This has been really helpful for me through my loss, whatever it was. And so I've just kept doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are your tools that you acquired still part of your daily practice, or what does your daily practice look like to maintain sanity even before?
Yeah, well, maintaining sanity, how to do that is a really good question to ask these days because our world has been kind of turned upside down. We are in a new normal, which is actually the name of my blog, A New Normal. And when I chose that name for my blog, I was referring to kind of, what is life like after you lose someone who's been a huge chunk of your heart. But now it kind of refers to what is our life like now, having given up our routines, our regular social connections, our way of being out in the world, and how do we adjust to that? How do we create a new normal for ourselves under these circumstances? So it's a very relevant question today also.
Yeah. So
my practice.
Yes. Yeah, what's your practice, and have you stepped it up with the new normal?
Yes, I have stepped it up since the coronavirus. Well, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, the stay-at-home order went into effect in early March or mid-March. And I had actually started staying at home a week earlier because I was recovering from an upper respiratory infection.
Oh, wow.
And I just thought, maybe I should just confine myself
Yeah.
to my home. And if I need anything, people can get it for me. So I've been doing this for almost a month now. And what I do to maintain my sanity, I still write. Writing is really the thing that is easiest for me, and I realize that's not the case for everyone, but for me, there's something about taking what's jumbling in my head and what's troubling me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and getting it on the page or getting it on the screen and making it concrete, that really helps me. And I've heard this from other writers as well, that it takes kind of the intangibles and makes them tangible. And then it's something that you can face and deal with. Whereas if it's just up here and it's being a lot of noise, that's just adding more distress to whatever your situation may be. Now, there are other forms of expression, of course. I mean, writing is one. There's singing, there's dance, there's art. But there's something about the writing that takes you into your left brain more, that kind of then enables you to access the situation from your frontal lobe where, your cognitive function is. And so writing has kind of that extra oomph as far as artistic expression goes at resolving the jumble.
Yeah. I mean, I feel very blessed to say that I can write very freely, and it's easy for me to just start writing. And before I know it, it's been a couple pages. And in my experience, definitely, I agree with what you're saying, that it's almost like it's bigger, whatever it is, it's bigger in your head. And then when it's on paper and it's tangible, it is, it being that concrete and not like that swirly infinite of thought is so powerful. But what do you say to people who are like, I can't write, I don't know what to write, I don't write? Like, what can they do to start writing? Are there any prompts that start to
Yes, I'm so glad you asked this question, because a lot of people don't think of themselves as writers. And this isn't about writing something that someone else is going to read. This is about writing something for yourself and processing and making tangible those intangibles. So one of my favorite prompts, and I get stuck sometimes. There are times when I don't know what to write, and I get frustrated. And the prompt that I return to over and over again is, well, what I really want to say is.
Okay.
What I really want to write about is. And sometimes there's a flip to that, which can also be very revealing, which is, what I really don't want to write about is. And that sometimes actually takes you even deeper.
Wow. I'm going to try it. I love it.
What I really don't want. In fact, I did a whole series that started with the prompt, what I really don't want to write about, when I was battling cancer 4 years ago. And I just started out, what I really don't want to write about is this whole bullshit experience with cancer. And I wrote a 9-part series as a result of that.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's important to remember, that it doesn't have to be this lovely, poetic journaling kind of sounds like, oh, I'm writing in my diary. I think that's like the connotation that a lot of people pull into what journaling is this like girly process of like, I have a crush on, la la la, whatever. But it can be ugly. One observation that I think is really cool too is looking through your past writings and how much your handwriting changes with emotion. And that's very telling of, you are releasing something. Like, look at you just go on the pages, And if you're worried about someone finding it, then you have to assign a best friend to be in charge of your journals, so that if anything happens to you, they can come sweep your journals out of the house. So
They can burn them.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, cool. So journaling and then singing and dancing, is that part of your daily practice too?
You know, I have in my youth, I did a lot of singing and dancing. My voice and my body are not as cooperative as they used to be. So I certainly enjoy listening to music, and I enjoy, moving to music, and I encourage people to do that. I think that for those of us who are staying at home, especially, it's really important to move.
Yeah.
Our bodies were designed for movement, not for sitting in a chair for 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
So move, and that will also move energy through your body. And that's helpful as well, because, we're experiencing a lot of fear and anxiety and anger and frustration and impatience. And, a lot of stuff is coming up, and it's important to not allow all of that to get stuck in your body.
Yeah.
Because that will compromise your immune system. And right now, that's the last thing you need.
Definitely.
So move your ass.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the emotion manifests physically. Inevitably it will. So, so music is a great suggestion. I don't know if you've seen John Legend's on his Instagram and on his Facebook. He does live. He's going live every day at 3 and playing on his piano with his kids and stuff. And it's so beautiful.
How wonderful.
So if you need to mix it up, I was checking that out earlier. So going back to like all of these different array of emotions that people are feeling right now, can we say that it's grief, or do you think that this is like that collectively people are starting to grieve their loss of, people that aren't working and they don't have that stability, people that love to travel and they don't have that freedom, and people that, that's who they are, is this outside social person. So really they don't have so much identity right now. Is that grief that they're feeling? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are all kinds of losses, right? I mean, I think that most people associate grief with the death of a loved one. But grief happens when a relationship ends, when there's a breakup or a divorce. Grief happens when you lose your job. Grief happens when you get married. Because, and I'll explain why. It's about change. It's about leaving a former identity behind, leaving a former routine behind, and saying goodbye to it, and stepping into something new and different. And whatever we've left behind is a loss, and it's appropriate to grieve it. Yes. So, yes, I think that all the losses that we are experiencing, even if we haven't actually lost a human loved one to the virus, we are experiencing grief. That weird kind of, this just doesn't feel good feeling that we're all having, that's grief.
Yeah. So, so thank you for clarifying that, because it's true. When I think of grief, I think of its association with death. But when you look at it as loss, and I looked at some synonyms of grief, and it was pretty, it can kind of go all over the spectrum with emotions that can be from the source of grief. So thank you for clarifying that. And I also wanted to touch on, there's a lot of people having different experiences right now. Some people are not as affected as others. And I think it's important to use this time to ask you, how do we handle grief that someone else is experiencing? I think that we all kind of feel like, well, I wish I could do something. I just don't know what to say. Maybe it's better not to say anything. People want to be helpful right now, but I think that can have, it can be to a fault also. So what recommendations can you give for for helping someone in their grief?
So the bulk of my work, when I sit with a client who is in the process of resolving their grief, whatever the loss has been, the most valuable thing I can do for them is be with them. Just witness their pain and don't try to fix it. Don't try to make them feel better. Don't offer advice. Just be with them. Hold the space of their pain. It is the most honoring and respectful and healing thing you can do for someone who's grieving. And it's hard. It's hard to do that because our impulse is to comfort and make them feel better, and perhaps distract them from whatever is causing them their grief. And that is actually dishonoring of what they are experiencing. They need to be seen and heard in their sad, snotty, messy state, because that is true for them in that moment, right? But it's hard, and it takes some practice. I still at times will reach out to hug someone who's crying, and I know better. But that there is that kind of human impulse to comfort someone when we see that they're in pain, right? So what I do instead is I just say, I'll validate what they're experiencing by saying things like, yeah, I bet that's really horrible for you, or I can only imagine how sad this makes you feel, and I can see that you're really having a hard time with this. Those sorts of things.
Yeah. So from a distance, do you think that what we can kind of do now is just put out, a phone call, a text message, and hold space, remotely? Would seem
Absolutely. And use Zoom. We have all this technology, so use it. I have found during this time that rather than getting on this and texting, which was kind of my go-to way of communicating with people on a daily basis, I'm calling people now. It's voice to voice, or I'm getting on Zoom so I can see their faces and see what they're going through.
So when you're
Better.
talking about, you see someone and you want to hug them, I feel that in that situation, it's easy to take on that person's sadness.
Yeah.
Even if you don't mean to, there's a figure of speech like, I wish I could take that from you and whatever, but how do you protect your energy when you're helping so many people through sadness? How do you keep your spirits lifted?
Well, one thing is, I just remind myself, and remember, again, I have some training, so it's more embedded in me to behave in this way. But I remind myself that that's their stuff. That's my client's experience, and I am separate from my client. It doesn't mean that I don't empathize with what they're experiencing. I'm certainly familiar with many of the feelings of grief, so I can relate when I see a client emoting in their grief. But I also know that that's theirs. And before and after a session, I ground myself. I'll either meditate for a few minutes before and after. Mostly just for a few minutes. I sit in silence and just take some deep breaths, feel my feet connecting to the floor or my butt connecting to the chair, and literally get grounded, connect myself to the earth. And that helps. But in the moment, for someone without training, I would just recommend reminding yourself that it's not yours. What you're observing in the other person and how they're expressing their emotion is not your emotion. Now, I will say there are times when I have clients sitting at my table and they start crying or they start telling me something that's emotional, and I'll tear up. I'm human, right? And I care about my clients, and I will tear up. But I know that what I'm tearing up about is the fact that I care about the client and I know that they're in pain, but it's their pain. It's not mine.
Okay. Cool. And so my last two questions to you, and then I would love to open up the floor to you to speak on anything you'd like. But my last two questions for you are, what is the best advice that you've ever been given, and what's the best advice that you could give?
So I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given is it's all temporary. So whatever emotional state you happen to be in, whether it's utter joy and exhilaration, or whether it's, the deepest depths of depression, all of it is temporary. We cycle through our emotions. So to be in a funk, to be in a depression, to be overwhelmed by anxiety, yes, that happens. I experience it at times, but I also always tell myself, okay, this sucks, but at some point it's going to change. It's just naturally going to change. No emotional state lasts forever. And that helps me. That helps me be hopeful when I'm feeling very low, and it helps me be humble when I'm feeling really high, like I'm on top of the world. I know that at some point I'm not going to be way up there.
Yeah.
And both humble and grateful for those moments of utter joy and exhilaration. But they pass as well.
Yeah. So that's your the best advice you've ever been given, and what you would like to pay forward, kind of.
Yeah.
I think that's timeless advice. Seriously,
Mm-hmm.
that's beautiful. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you. And is there anything that you feel called to add to this conversation? Anything that's kind of speaking to you that you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah, I wrote about this recently, and I found it really helpful. So I have found myself, and I imagine many other people as we're going through this, have found themselves asking the question, what if? What if I get sick? What if someone I love dies? What if, we have to stay at home for a whole year? What if it takes them 18 months to create a vaccine? So the what-iffing is an anxiety process, and there's an antidote to it.
Okay.
And the antidote is, well, right here, right now, ... Okay? Because the what if question takes you into the future, which we don't know what's going to happen, right? Yeah. And we're not there yet. We're here in the present.
Yeah.
So then by saying right here, right now, I'm healthy, I'm safe, my loved ones are safe, my loved ones are healthy. Right now, I have a roof over my head. Right now, I have food in the refrigerator. Right now, I have enough toilet paper, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so that's what I do, because we all, I think we all have a propensity to worry about the future.
Yeah.
And I think especially now we're doing a lot of that. So if you can go ahead and ask yourself the what ifs and write them down if you want to. List them out, look at them. But after each one, write, well, right here and right now, dot, dot, dot,
Yeah.
to counter what your what if was.
Cool. Thank
And
you.
see if that helps. See if that helps.
Yeah. It's kind of, I like this saying that kind of goes along with that. It's worrying is just meditating on shit.
Yeah.
You're right, because you're really focused on the what if. So thank you so much. I'm going to post your journaling prompts and some of your advice and your contact information and your links to your blog and everything with this video.
Thank you.
I'll post it and on the YouTube channel. And yeah, it was really great. I really appreciate your time, and take it easy out in Cali. Thanks.
Thank you. You do the same in Florida.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
For sure.